Welcome, dear viewers, to the second part of our review/analysis of War of the Rohirrim. I make no excuse for the lengthy space between posts and won't waste your time on a recap of Part 1, save to say that we are now headed for the adaptation territory, and we will start by looking at the story of the animated film. Without further ado, let us consider this War of Two Visions. In the main, we are looking at a similar story to the version Tolkien gave us as far as the broad strokes are concerned. The devil, however, is in the details, which change the flavor of the narrative, exchanging tragedy for parody and gravitas for utter silliness. In lieu of providing a summary of the whole affair, let me instead point out the pillars this farce rests on. To begin with, the story is now told through the eyes of Hera. As an aside, I must say this is possibly the stupidest choice the writers of this excretion could have made in terms of naming conventions, even if we do accept the premise they presented us with in hopes of justifying this disaster. But such design choices will be discussed more fully later on. For now, suffice it to say that the point of view has shifted to that of Helm's daughter. This, in and of itself, would not be an issue were the story solid. Indeed, a lot could have been achieved by the use of an indirectly involved character. Alas, the writers have not allowed us to see through Hera's eyes for any decent reasons, such as ratcheting up the tension, providing heart-wrenching scenes of personal tragedy, or even delivering a fresh take on a known tale. Any and all of these reasons make sense and treat the potential viewer with respect. And if Hollywood writers have made anything clear for the past decade or more, it is that they hold their audience in utter contempt. We are there to be lectured to and belittled for our quaint, perhaps even hateful ways. Hera is here to be the hero of the story and single-handedly save the day, or what passes for saving the day in these writers' heads. To solidify in our minds the supremacy of Hera, this film engages in the decades-old by this point trope of hobbling its male characters with stupidity beyond measure, the foresight of a toddler trudging out into a traffic-heavy road, and the general abilities of a wet rag, which makes it all the more unbelievable whenever the plot decides they must prevail on our heroine, and I use the term heroine loosely. But do not be deceived, it is only the antagonists being treated in this way. Hera's father and brothers are right up there, being as stupid and reckless as the opposing team, for no good reason. Last but not least, there is a decided lack of authenticity to the mentality of our characters. They come across precisely how one might expect a poorly written, crawl-barred in for the sole purpose of making a point, uninspired bunch of characters to do, forced, trite, and insulting. These are not Tolkienian actors on the stage of an epic. They are threadbare stereotypes bashing the audience's brains in with the cudgel of their unsubtle message. Patriarchy bad, women good. Truly a mind-bending concept certain sectors of the population have not been harping on for the last few hundred years. On the whole, every detail of this project has been treated with a shocking lack of regard, from the story to the characters to the art. Of course, I am aware words are wind, so do allow me to provide you with some examples of what I mean, focusing on our main character. Let us begin with the very opening of the film, where we are told that some 200 years before the story of the War of the Ring, there lived Hera. The narration decides to, at this point, impart some particulars of the tale.
Hera, only daughter of Helm, born under a harvest moon. Her mother did not live to see the dawn.
But why?
The girl could ride a horse before she could walk. Wild, headstrong, railed her father, though in truth he was so proud.
But why?
By her hand, many great deeds were done, but do not look for tales of her in the old songs.
Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
There are none.
I am shocked. Shocked! Well, not that shocked.
Having managed to maintain a tenuous grasp on the remaining few brain cells left me after enduring repeated viewings of this film, I can point out the following. We are told right off the bat that there are older stories than the ones we are most familiar with, and then we are told not to look for mention of Hera in the narrative repository of the Rohirrim. Of course, as most will already be aware, song and stories are intimately intertwined. For much of human history, they tended to be one and the same thing. Stories were sung, presumably to harness the mnemonic power of sound patterns and aid successful transmission. As we have comfortably reached unsustainable levels of self-contradiction before the film proper has even begun, I would like us to take a moment and remember people have actually been paid to write this, and it's not even on the level of fan fiction. One must wonder how Hera's story came to be passed down through the ages in such circumstances, a question that will never find answer, naturally. Bracketed between the arms of these opposing ends, there is a further contradiction. Helm is said to rail about Hera's character, yet he is at the same time proud of her, specifically for exhibiting traits he rails at. This is, of course, beyond confusing, and we can only presume the prologue was written in 5 minutes before they were supposed to wrap up the project, because clearly nobody thought it through. Either that or the writer's grasp of the English language is mediocre, to put it mildly. A third point against any interest being shown to this project is demonstrated by the following observation. Born under a harvest moon, her mother did not live to see the dawn. What does this mean? We are provided no context for what being born under a harvest moon signifies. Is that somehow special to the Rohirrim? Is that what gives her the power to steal the glory and valor of the male characters? Is it the reason her mother died? Is someone from the writer's room overly fond of astrology? Unfortunately, we will never know. Before we drown ourselves in a puddle of tears, do give some attention to one of Hera's supposed strengths. Unlike the writers, she can ride a horse before she can walk. Now, this supposed feat of ingenuity is meant to floor us. Unfortunately for Hera and the writers behind this inanity, by the standards of any equestrian culture, that is simply the norm. Largely nomadic, such peoples tend to be on the road a lot, making it necessary to have a good grasp of the art of horse riding as soon as may be. I would certainly hope any discerning viewers remain deeply unimpressed with this attempt at raising Hera's worth in our eyes. To my utter torment, the film does not have the decency to end at this point. Having exhausted any semblance of logic and coherence, the farce goes on for another couple of hours, and you feel every minute of it, let me tell you. We must therefore comfort ourselves with the knowledge that the value of the collective IQ the writer's room sums up continues to remain firmly at room temperature levels. The best part being that whether you choose to think of it as Celsius or Fahrenheit, these people are the joke that keep on giving. As happens in Tolkien's tale, Freke comes a-courting on behalf of his son, and Helm refuses his suit, ensuring the escalation of the conflict. As the two men head outside, we are treated to a scene between Wolf and Hera. An embarrassing scene, not for us, but for every single one of the people involved in the chain of approvals leading to this display. Being a selfish, entitled brat, Hera makes it very clear she not only does not want to marry Wolf, but she does not want to marry at all.
I have no thoughts of marriage at all.
That's not how it works.
I do not want to marry you. I do not want to marry any man.
That's not how any of this works.
Now, dear viewer, to our modern ears, this may sound as a very sensible desire. Why should Hera be forced to marry anyone? It hardly sounds fair to the poor man who will have to put up with her. I do not even wish such a fate on Wolf, clueless, desperate idiot that he is. The situation is a bit more complex, however. You see, Hera is a princess. This is no mere title. As royalty, you live in the lap of relative luxury, your every need met, sometimes even at the expense of those under you. You get the best there is to be had in terms of food, clothing, education, and entertainment on the understanding that you will pay this investment back. Men traditionally did so by the strength of their arm, women by marriage. Lest you think marriage is the sacrificial domain of women alone, let me point out that men too were equally expected to marry for the benefit of their kingdom. Marriage is a way to forge or strengthen extant alliances. It is a give and take not only between two individuals, but between two peoples. It is a symbolic union, meant to promote common ground, teamwork, and a shared good. It would have been understandable had Hera wished Freka's offer be declined so she could serve her people by representing their interests in Gondor. It would have been equally heroic to sue for assent on the grounds of harmonizing internal relations within the kingdom. But, of course, we live in the age of incomprehensible levels of self-centeredness. Hera can think of no greater good than her own preferences being met. On this point, I am reminded of another film I saw, which highlights what I believe would have made for a far more interesting concept.
Dacă pentru a scăpa Moldova va trebui să vă umiliți, să nu vă treacă prin minte să nu o faceți. Pentru scăparea unui neam, câteodată cineva trebuie să îngenuncheze în locul unui neam întreg. Și în această îngenunchiere este mai multă jertfă decât în vitejii nesăbuite. Semnează să ai tăria să-ți ucizi numele tău din veacuri. Noi, domnitorii, nu putem avea ambiții deșarte. Puterea înseamnă jertfă, ca jertfa lui vodă Ștefan, îngenunchind la Colomea. Puterea nu ne-a fost dată să ne săpăm doar în marmură cu ea. Puterea ne este dată să ne și umilim. După cum sunt vremurile, după cum o cer nevoile țării.
I believe such an attitude fully encapsulates the ideal of what the relation between ruler and those ruled ought to be. As C.S. Lewis puts it in his work Mere Christianity.
Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less.
There is also the idea that the marriage is sought for by Freka as a way to gain the throne. I would like to point out this is a ridiculous notion. At this point in our tale, Helm had two sons, both presumably adults and able to marry and sire children. The line was hardly dying out by Tolkienian standards. In any event, the heart-to-heart between lovesick fool and beast of selfishness is finally interrupted by the world's slowest brother, whom I will call Meathead from this point on. Meathead saves us further mortification by forcing a scene transition to Helm and Freka's battle. Because we must at all times show the boundless misogyny of the antagonist, Freka cannot help but insult Hera, claiming she is no lady. He also insults Helm's parental skills. Considering the evidence, he is not far off. Helm, nonetheless, will not take such disrespect towards his daughter and promptly sends Freka sprawling on his back, permanently. As one might expect, an incensed wolf makes a play at revenge. He draws out his sword and attacks. Helm, equal to the task of defending himself, grabs Wolf by the throat and would have killed him then and there, ending the insanity. Most people would regard this as just, considering attacking one's king is generally regarded as treason, and treason is usually punishable by death. But because common sense is a trait entirely lacking in our main character, she intervenes and pleads for Wolf's life. Naturally, the angle of the film is that she is such a good person that she cannot stand the idea of Wolf dying. She can hardly stomach Freka's death, and he was a misogynistic prick. This uncanonized saint of mercy is nonetheless blind to the fact that by letting Wolf and his close kin live, she is creating danger for her own people. Presumably, that mercy is only enough for one person at a time, and at present, she needs all of it for Wolf, the guy who just tried to murder her father, the guy she does not love and would not marry even to save her people, as we will see in a bit. Before that, though, we are given a bit of history on the relationship between Wolf and Hera. The film takes us to their childhood days of playing with live steel and attempted manslaughter. Someone's minder is getting flogged after this. Hera gives further proof of being just a horrible friend by abandoning Wolf to his fate after having cut him across the eye. We, of course, know that he has not lost the eye, but she doesn't at this point. So instead of facing up to her mistake, she runs away. You'd think she'd care at least enough to see him nearer home, even if she did not go with him all the way. That would require courage, mercy, genuine contrition, sprung from an understanding of the repercussions of one's actions and concern for her friend. Hera, having none of those, is remarkably modern in her unwillingness to take responsibility for her own actions. Some things never change, and some people refuse to learn any lessons ever. The film mercifully switches to the present at this stage, and we get a good dose of action heroine Hera as she saves a very useless Frialaf from a mummakeel, then gets herself kidnapped by Wolf's men. Surprising as this triumph of inferior life forms against the being of pure goodness that is Hera might seem, do not despair. It is mostly a plot device meant to bring her face to face with Wolf for yet another dose of humiliation aimed at our antagonist. Wolf monologues at Hera about his evil plans. She calls him out on his evilness. Again, she is surprisingly modern in her sensibilities, which can only be to the good. It might piss Wolf off enough to kill her on the spot. I kid, of course. He's incapable of doing her any real physical harm. The script says so. Anyway, the truly salient point is Hera is offered a chance to end the war and stop this bloodshed she abhors. Being the strong, independent, smart woman that she is, Hera decides to begin her answer thusly.
If I agree to this, if I agree to be your bride.
If you agree, is there no end to the arrogance of your house? Even now, you can barely stomach the thought.
Wolf is absolutely correct in saying she can barely stomach the notion. He must be, because when faced with the peril of her people and the well-being of her father and brothers, she cannot even muster a shred of diplomacy. You can really see Helm let his daughter run wild. She doesn't even have the basics of negotiation down. Regrettably, her stupidity and lack of tact remain utterly without consequence as Olwyn swoops in to save her. No lessons will be learned on her watch, another opportunity squandered. But then, Hera is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I am sure humility is to her what water is to the Wicked Witch of the West. So Hera and Olwyn escape while Frialaf is being his usual useless self and basically contributing as little as possible to the whole thing. Long story short, they reach Edoras. Frialaf gets rebuked and sent away, a sort of internal exile if you will, and we are plunged into war. I guess that second refusal really broke the camel's back as far as Wulf is concerned. Helm refuses to let his daughter fight, choosing instead two lesser options, Meathead and Sensitive Soul. We will speak about Hera's brothers later on. For now, take note of the fact that Meathead dies for basically nothing, and Sensitive Soul is too stupid to consider switching to a younger, stronger horse in battle, opting instead to ride his old mare. He is obviously captured and has his throat slit. Because the line of Helm still has one strong man about it, and such a crime against modern storytelling is not to be endured, Helm is oh so helpfully demoted to invalid status by the script. He rises again to go off on mindless, and I emphasize, mindless killing sprees, because removing agency from his actions makes them all the better. The long and short of it would be that Hera finds a way to sneak out of the keep and locate her father in one of his dazes, and they are obviously faced with the enemy. Helm sacrifices himself, trading the impressive title of Hammerhand for the humbler but infinitely more appropriate Helm Hamfist when declaring,
No, Hera. They need you.
You must lead them now.
No, God!
You could rule the world.
No, God, please, no! 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 No!
Now that our single, semi-competent, positive male character is dead, we can safely get down to the business of crowning Hera as the savior of the Rohirrim, firstly by sending for Freylof, then by organizing a strategy that is sure to buy them time while putting her and her alone in peril, because just now we are in dire need of stakes. And that we will only get by putting actually likable characters in danger, since anyone with even the slightest understanding of the facts will be unlikely to like Hera. That only leaves us with the women, children, and the soldiery bravely defending them all. In an illustrious display of sheer insanity, Hera puts on the dress of some unfortunate bride who succumbed to a fever and died before her wedding. While this is not technically speaking grave robbing, as there were no human remains in the dress, the discerning viewer might well be praying that some manner of curse intervenes at this point and Hera is swept away by whatever did the other bride in. We are not so lucky. The Bride of Death, as she now calls herself, rides out to meet Wolf spoiling for a fight. She insultingly declares herself,
I am the last of the true bloodline of Rohan.
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
Seeing as Wolf is not only a man, but the antagonist, he must therefore be not only incompetent and stupid, but a coward and liar. If that were not bad enough, his skill is still inferior to Hera when it comes to combat, thus she easily defeats him. Once more, the film attempts to puff our protagonist up by making out that she is perfectly willing to let Wolf live after everything he's done. Naturally, being the snake that he is, Wolf treacherously attempts to end her. Hera easily dispatches him, and this time does kill him, cutting off his air supply with a shield. Friolaf finally puts in an appearance, all dressed up in Helm's armor. He cleans up the small fry, foolish enough to have remained about, and thus ends the War of the Rohirrim. Before the credits roll, the obligatory epilogue catching us up on the fates of the survivors must take place. Here we learn that Hera selflessly gives up the throne so she might ride off into the distance, starting a quasi-lesbian relationship with her friend and mentor, Alwyn. It is true the film does not state as much, but most of us are wise to the ways of Hollywood at this point. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, chances are it is, in fact, a duck. This particular duck makes it clear Friolaf is some sort of second choice to the throne, and we can only infer some manner of selfish monster bent on hogging all glory to himself. Despite all the remarkable victories Hera has brought her people, not only do they support Friolaf's covetous distortion of fact, but they make a point of entirely erasing Hera from the story. None too bothered, Hera exits the picture. Forever. Good riddance. Of course, here we are yet again faced with the contradiction of there being and yet not being a tale about Helm's daughter. But we are never to solve that conundrum, so we might as well chalk it up to Hera's ghost herself having recounted the tale to Elwyn. It cannot have been her descendants who pass on the tale, for there are none, unsurprisingly. Having given due attention to the thief in our midst, let us turn to the character which Tolkien had considered the hero of this particular tale. I have suggested in the first part of the analysis that Helm is made of the same stuff as the figures of Sir Lancelot and King Arthur himself. He embodies, in his own fashion, the chivalric code to which the whole of Arda is indebted. The film takes another view, perhaps unintentionally. Considering the fashionable writing tropes at work, however, I would feel more confident wagering on another attempt at subversion. And we have been subverted, dear viewer, no mistake about it. Tolkien's Helm is very intentional in his actions and at the same time a very practical man. The film version starts out with a thin veneer of his book's counterpart plastered all over the uninspired design, but ever so slowly in the first half hour of this affair deviates into the makings of Helm Hamfist, foolish ruler who would have done better to listen to his daughter from the start. Our first inkling to this effect comes on the heels of Frekka's death, as Helm tries to explain to those gathered about that he only punched his enemy the once. One needn't be pleased about the outcome of Frekka's death, but to suggest he would have shied away from the consequences is to impugn his very character. Consider the following. What goes on between Helm and Frekka is in essence an occurrence of trial by combat. The gods, having decided for Helm's righteousness, strike Frekka dead on the spot. This is how it would have played out for the onlookers, which is why in Tolkien's story, Wolf does not attempt to murder his king. The writing team for this project, being both ignorant and incapable, goes so far as to have Hera shaking her head at her father's attempt at explaining himself. A further point against the film's version of Helm is his utter lack of foresight. Now in the books, Helm declared Wolf and his kin enemies of the crown, as it were, and sends men out to capture them. That they escape and are then exiles is therefore a less desirable outcome. The film has it that Helm takes into account Hera's wishes and chooses exile for Wolf to begin with. A very stupid choice when he has already attacked you and you know he is out for revenge. Helm's stupidity does not end there, however. When Wolf's attack finally comes, he goes out to meet his enemy with all of his force. And when I say all, I mean all but for a single man that we see on screen. Suppose as we might that there is a handful of them about, it remains an insane strategy to employ. We are after all not talking about a kingdom on the verge of collapse at this point. Naturally, Wolf seizes on this opportunity and leads a not-so-small group of mercenaries to attack and take Edoros. Luckily, his plan is foiled by Hera, who sets fire to the city and evacuates its people. Since she did not think to send even one man to make her plans known to her kin, both her brothers return in haste, thinking to save her, and Meathead meets his end for it. There is little more to be said of this version of the character. Tolkien, of course, envisioned his end in a way worthy of the eldest son and heir to his father's throne. In that tale, he dies defending the doors of Meduseld, that is, his father's throne, symbol of authority. Sensitive Soul is equally the shadow of a far better character. In the Professor's tale, Harmer goes out seeking remedy against famine. He may have done so against his father's wishes, but slim as the chance of success might have been, we are still speaking about an attempt that makes some semblance of sense. Sensitive Soul, on the other hand, tortures us with such gems as
Where is the horse? Where is the rider? Lost into shadow where I cannot find her.
In a move that proves characters are only as smart as their writers, he chooses, as I've mentioned before, to ride out to battle on the back of an old mare. Now, do not get me wrong, mares were widely used as travel horses due to their docile temper and endurance on the road. When looking at European cavalry, we are presented with quite a different option, the stallion. Stallions were prized for their aggressivity in battle and the imposing figure they cut. Common sense has been chasing the writers, but they are clearly faster. As a result, Sensitive Soul is captured and gets killed before his father. Returning to Helm, it is at this point that he falls into what we would term a self-induced coma in the film. His agency simply must be taken away for Hera to shine. So his act of bravery and going out to face his enemy alone becomes a matter of sleepwalking in the film. He meets his end, but not before taking care to puff up his daughter and admit he was basically wrong to ever doubt her. Of the characters Tolkien envisioned, one alone remains on the side of the heroes. Freelaf has been twiddling his thumbs in Dunharrow, as the narration helpfully tells us.
High in the stronghold of Dunharrow, Freylaf waited.
I'm sure no one is surprised at his lack of action. After all, as a man, he would be incapable of making the slightest move without the direct order of his benevolent overlord. Hera sends for him through one of the great eagles, now happy to provide Middle-earth with delivery services if only Hera would ask them, because she once brought them a piece of meat. Anyhow, Freelaf rides to the relief of the Hornburg. He takes the throne and proceeds to erase Hera's contribution from the whole affair, making certain no songs remain remembering her great deeds, except for the songs and tales that do remain and are told around the fire. Alone, Olwyn understands and appreciates Hera's true worth. This character is not based on anything Tolkien wrote, but an original creation for this tale. Obviously then, at an advanced age and with a figure that suggests an over-fondness for honeycakes, she can take on any man and win the fight. She is of course the one who taught Hera how to fight, passing on the mantle of invincibility which only comes through the power of fallopian tubes. There is really nothing more to say about this character. On the villainous side, Wolf presents us with a pathetic antagonist, demonstrating cowardice, idiocy, and incompetence. He is the perfect enemy of the strong, independent fish who needs no bicycle, an incel. His whole motivation revolves around Hera rejecting him. He lies to his own people, is such a poor combatant one wonders how he ever gained the respect of the Dunlendings to the point where they'd appoint him their leader, and displays shocking amounts of cowardice by refusing to face Helm and basically attempting to sneak in attacks wherever he can. This portrayal stands in stark contrast to the Wolf of Tolkien's account, who was at least manly enough to fight when the need calls for it. Last but not least, there is Lord Thorn to consider. This traitor in the midst of the Rohirrim is marked by his accentuated bouts of misogyny and dies in a botched attempt at killing Hera. I make note of him only to say there will be some small observations pertaining to the character in the segment dedicated to design choices. For the time being, however, we must part ways. Thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you in the next, and what I pray is to be the last part of this series.